Hello, friends. Welcome, welcome. I'm supposed to say hello back. Hello, right? Okay. Welcome to the Parsons Communication Design Lecture Series for Spring 2024. Woo!
Enthusiastic.
My name is Kelly Walters. I'm the director of the BFA Communication Design Program, also an assistant professor of communication design here. I'm excited that you're all joining us today. The CD lecture series allows CD students to meet design thinkers and practitioners within the discipline and adjacent fields. We have an exciting lineup of speakers scheduled for this semester, and you can learn more about the upcoming lectures in our CD app and watch past lectures on our YouTube channel. Our next lecture will be by Scott Reinhardt on Friday, February 23rd at noon in Kaplan Hall. But today, we are joined by the illustrious speaker Zoë Pulley, who is standing here to my left.
Hey.
Right. Zoë Pulley is a designer and a maker who utilizes stuff to surface the seemingly ordinary stories of Black folks through mixed media, typography, and audio. She defines stuff as artifacts, both physical and non-physical, that may be relegated as unimportant to some as merely stuff. Most recently, Pulley has shown work in group exhibition Dress Code at the Newport Art Museum and at a performance at the Virginia Museum. Her practice includes ongoing collaborations such as a wearable line inspired by her grandmother called GRAN SANS and a collectively authored publication titled Black Joy Archive. In 2021, she designed a zine for Combahee's Radical Call, Black Feminisms, Awaken Boston at the Boston Center for the Arts. Her work is held in the collections of the Valentine Museum, the Harvard Radcliffe Institute, and Printed Matter. Pulley is an inaugural recipient of the Rhode Island School of Design Society Presidential Fellowship and was awarded the Graduate Graphic Designer to Watch by GDUSA in 2023. She earned a BFA from Virginia Commonwealth University in 2015 and an MFA in graphic design from the Rhode Island School of Design. Zoë is currently, and this is super amazing, an artist in residence at the Studio Museum in Harlem. So I'm super excited to welcome Zoë to us for our first lecture this semester.
Thank you. All right, hi everyone. Thank you, Kelly, for the lovely intro. It's always so funny to hear your bio read. I was just like sitting there like, ugh. But I'm privileged to join you all this morning, and thank you guys for taking the time to come out. I'm just gonna jump right in. So hi, my name is Zoë Pulley, and I'm a designer / busybody that likes to find and make stuff. Stuff being the artifacts, memories, ephemera, and seemingly little nonsensical things that gradually gather within junk drawers, attic chests, closets, and crawl spaces. Archival to some, artifacts to others, but these terms adhere to some sort of Western value system, terms used to validate histories within an institutional hierarchy. Instead, I like to use stuff, a term intended to spotlight the ordinary, a term intended to define the extraordinary found within the seemingly ordinary things of everyday life. Over the course of the last few years, I began to question, what is the significance of the implicit choices designers have and continue to make? For instance, why is it that I am so fond of the color orange? For the last 5 years or so, I have decided to have a color of the year, or what my real ones refer to as Pulley's color, or Pulley being extra. This color has been determined by an unconscious leaning on it for all things within a relatively brief period of time, resulting in nearly a year's worth of decisions, wares, and items made with this color driving the provisional boat. But why? Why is it that orange has been this reoccurring motif throughout these periods, and what role has it served in my recent years within my design practice? Please know now that this talk is in no way intended to frame a larger exploration of color theory for the contents that follow. Instead, orange is being used here as a query towards understanding the who, what, when, where, and why. towards my current state of self, a state which I now understand through the means of family, place, and memory, a state that experiences life in a mode of constant hypervisibility while grappling with the reality of being selectively seen, a desire for the layers to be revealed, parts of the whole to be granted space to be made visible. The stuff is always the origin point in this method I like to practice called surfacing, a method that I attempt to define in 3 parts: rememory, or the unlayering and piecing together of stuff; kin, or the acknowledgement of ancestry through stuff making; and hypervisibility, or the consciousness of oneself in the place, time, and space in which the work is being disseminated. Surfacing is a method that challenges traditional notions associated with Western archival practices through an exploration of material culture. By locating the intrinsic connections of narratives discovered in often overlooked materials, this mode of production allows me to bring forth new knowledge of specific histories using various media aligned to specific narratives. Orange is bright. It is a color synonymous with construction sites to signal both safety and danger, used by surveyors to mark territory and space, and worn for various utilitarian purposes to ensure individuals are seen. Orange prompts reaction. It alerts viewers to be keenly aware of the various messages within an environment, to take notice of the things that might otherwise be left unseen. Before the 15th century, the color orange did not exist within the English language. Up until that point, all things we would refer to with this designation were labeled yellow-red. It wasn't until the Portuguese introduced the fruit to the colonies by way of Asia that the color adopted its new moniker. In a sense, orange did not become a color until it was surfaced, until it could be attested to, be made tangible, and become recognizable. Orange as we know it did not exist until it was made visible. Once something becomes visible, it generates new meaning, new vernacular, and new cultural currency. It becomes part of one's larger understanding of the world. To exist is to be seen. And like my innate fondness for the color orange, I have always been drawn to my family's stories. My current practice is one that attempts to reveal the regular, every day, in the spectacularly ordinary parts of Black life as conditioned on a Black individual's terms. Through these various uses of surfacing and surfaces, such as textiles, typography, found objects, and sound, my work attempts to synthesize seemingly disparate pieces into a narrative whole. So let's begin to deconstruct this surfacing method. Step 1, rememory.
I have memories that are very good, and I have memories that are not so good. And I'm trying not to embellish, but I think people, when they're sharing their memory most of the time, and I probably do the same thing. If somebody really shows an interest while you're telling them to share it, people tend to spice it up, whether it's good or bad. And then they're happy talking about it. What can you do? Because it's basically the truth. You know, they just add a little something, a little spice. I don't know whether they add that for themselves, but as long as it doesn't hurt anybody, what the heck.
So that's my grandmother, Sandra Olivia Moon Hightower, AKA GRAN SANS, AKA my favorite little homie. She's one of the primary inspirations for this body of work, and she is at the heart of this concept of rememory, a term used in Toni Morrison's novel Beloved to describe the recollection of things that a person has forgotten. In the context of Morrison's novel, this idea emphasizes the unwarranted thoughts versus those that are willingly recalled. But in this method of surfacing, Rememory is utilized as a means to access parts of memory that one may not see value in until prompted by another. This prompt and response process is exemplified in a project I began in the fall of 2022 titled, Found Myself in My Grandmother's Closet. It's the beginning of an ongoing collaboration with photographer Ray Landres that profiles the narratives of family members around one question. What is a memory that you have with one clothing item that is or once was in your closet? This question is aimed to explore the complexities of Black experiences post the Great Migration while uplifting stories of the spectacularly ordinary. Interviews with family were conducted, recorded, and then interpreted to create a new version of the garment as described in each person's account. Each story was then transcribed onto the surface of each garment, with the entirety of the stories being housed within the inside of the garment itself. The first phase of this project took Ray and I to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the home of my grandmother, Sandra Olivia Moon Hightower, my grandfather, Taylor Hightower Jr., and my uncle, Taylor Hightower III, and resulted in 3 wares: a dress made for a first date, a sharp linen suit, and a pretty cool tour jacket. The garments themselves are made of cotton twill, a structured woven fabric that utilizes a diagonal woven pattern to preserve its integrity. Both sides of my family have traceable roots to the American South, paternally in Alabama and maternally in Georgia, states part of the Cotton Belt that have had a long-fraught history with the cash crop throughout the 19th, 20th, and 21st century. The surface pattern of each garment was created using processing by inputting strings of text that were then generated to create a typographic pattern. Large-scale embroidery is then layered on top, featuring various pull quotes from each conversation. The primary question that prompted this piece is intended to be a mutual excavation of one's personal history between 2 of kin, which brings us to step 2, kin.
Now, your footprint from being here, it's true, you're working here, and then you got something to prove it. You know, it's like, I was here, and this is what I produced. It's the family farm, part of the nation's farm. It builds your heart. If you're lucky, if you're blessed, and I've been blessed.
Gran San again, my girl. By definition, kin speaks to those we have a direct familial lineage to, like my girl Gran San. But in this mode of surfacing, it also speaks to the kismet parallels one can fortuitously have with another. For instance, the life and work of designer and entrepreneur Sarah Penn. Penn was born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 1927. She was the daughter of a social worker, her mother being one of 7, raised by a mother who was a farmer in Alabama. Penn followed her mother's path and began a career in social work in New York shortly after graduating from Spelman College in 1951. During those initial years, she worked her day job while simultaneously beginning a practice of collecting, making, and communing through jewelry, textiles, and the creation of her legacy, Knob Kerry. Knob Kerry was a first-of-its-kind concept store in the 1960s in New York's Lower East Side. The name of the shop was inspired by a short story titled The Adventures of the Black Girl and Her Search for God, in which a young South African girl carries a Zulu fighting stick known as a knob kerry. With it in tow, she goes on a journey to find her own personal understanding of God, and whenever she encounters anyone who tries to impose their beliefs on her, she hits them with the stick. I thought if anyone tells us what fashion is, we're just going to hit them with our stick. Our store. We'll discover our own fashion, Sarah Penn and Radical Rags. Discovering the life and work of Sarah Penn was cool on various fronts. We both attended Spelman College, had grandmamas from Alabama, and worked in fashion. But putting those circumstantial parallels aside, for me, Penn's quote and outlook on fashion exemplifies the essence of my understanding of design. Traditionally, designers take things, or various types of stuff, to communicate meaning through pretty images, words, and implied meaning. Then said pretty images, words, implied meanings are utilized for capital gain within a preordained value system defined by specific groups with power for commodity, cultural capital, and displays of intellectual fluency. But to pay honor to the words of Penn, what does it look like to discover one's own understanding of design? Separate from the mainstay, the imposed belief system, and what parts make up the equation to that personal understanding? To echo GRAN SANS, for me, it is and has been the family part. Arguably, the Black American family radically subverts various deeply rooted systems that actively work towards their disenfranchisement, demonization, and othering. It is a unit that has been made to be believed as a rarity, an exception to the norm, when in reality, it has and continues to function as a foundation towards collective consciousness formed amongst Black bodies of the diaspora. In the spring of 2022, I explored these ideas in a project titled Moving On Up, in which I interviewed 8 Black Americans around one question: what does moving on up really mean within your lived experience? And what is your definition of assimilation? The project was inspired by the 1975 American sitcom, The Jeffersons. The show is credited as one of the first portrayals of a successful Black family, as George and Louise were able to move on up from working class Queens to a coveted Manhattan high-rise in the sky, but not without arguably facing negotiations within this space of ascension. Interviews with folks were left open-ended, the primary goal being to give them the space to interpret and discuss these concepts to a length of their choosing, with the intention to visualize this paradox of the external ways Blackness is required by some to be presented versus the internal notions of one's own human experience. Select pull quotes were embroidered onto typical workwear attire, dress shirts, suit jackets, and blazers, with the use of monochromatic threads to metaphorically represent these internal conversations coming to the surface. If it isn't clear by now, work like this, a confluence between personal and global histories, material exchange, and internal exploration of being, is how I make and understand design. But design is a big word. A word that continues to be diluted and collapsed into a singular meaning. Something unseasoned, easily digestible. The traditional understanding of graphic design as established by Western European aesthetics, the 20th century Industrial Revolution, the World Wars, and the resulting modernist movement, and last but certainly not least, the hierarchical systems in which select voices and methods are deemed bond over others, has brought us to our current moment in which all those standards are now being questioned. Design has traditionally asked the designer to participate in its established distillation system. Yes, there's an argument to be made that all humans are hardwired to seek simplification towards ways of understanding, and design is a result of that whole. But what does it mean to see efforts of people and groups push time and time and time again for something more complex, more nuanced, to be recognized in all parts of their existence, only to have to continue that work every 50 years or so later? Does it mean that being a conscious Black body that participates in the design distillation system is a futile act? Nihilism is not my jam, and with that, I believe that the power continues to be to subvert the simplification process, and by doing so, this process relies on the language activated within the system itself. Language itself is the thought interaction of a people. Although it is designed primarily to communicate experiences in fundamental ways, poetry, on the other hand, is the symbol or essence of language. Designed to sensitize meaning, motivate, create, or recreate experience, and bestow a state of perception not ordinarily experienced or not experienced in an ordinary way. The poet, even though she or he speaks plainly, is a manipulator of symbols and language images that have been planted by experience in the collective subconscious of a people. Through this manipulation, he or she creates new or intensified meaning and experience, whether to the benefit or detriment of his or her audience. Sonia Sanchez. As mentioned earlier, design is the manipulation of words, images, and implied meaning. Designers work with data sets that are defined by these three parts to create particular outputs and further meaning. My design practice is one that consciously chooses to create my own data sets based within personal vernaculars learned from, through, and by the folks whom I call my kin. Which brings us back to GRAN SANS, Sarah Penn, and another ongoing project I began in 2017 titled GRAN SANS. GRAN SANS is an extension of an ongoing practice of making shared with my grandmother, Sandra Olivia Moon Hightower, AKA GRAN SANS, AKA someone you guys probably feel like you know at this point. I have fond memories of visiting GRAN SANS' home as a child and spending afternoons together scavenging through her extensive personal jewelry collection. We would deconstruct and remake pieces and always find a way to create something new, unique, and in a way I can only explain as the GRAN SANS way. Much like the concept of combining grandmother and Sandra, GRAN SANS is an ongoing project that aims to connect, pay homage to, and extend a practice of my grandmother's. Since 2017, there have been 6 culminating lines that all focus on this intention through materiality, art direction, and overarching narrative. Season 6 is inspired by a photograph of GRAN SANS with her cousin, Ramona, in Wildwood, New Jersey, the summer of 1956. Back in February of 2022, the two of us met over Zoom and chatted about this image, among others, with her rememorizing this day vividly through descriptions of Frailinger's saltwater taffy, her grandparents, and the fact that she was wearing one of her favorite black and white checkered skirts. Taking material and color cues from this oral narrative, Season 6 of GRAN SANS line features 7 styles utilizing glitter resin balls, which reference the saltwater taffy, black and white plexi, which reference the checkered skirt, and sterling silver metal. Each style was designed to be worn on all bodies, with the editorial facet of this line featuring 4 different models amongst a dreamy pink backdrop. Each model is wearing a black and white herringbone motif, again a cue to the checkered black skirt, and a pink palette is a direct nod to one of my GRAN SANS favorite colors. Omnipresent kinship is a term I adopted from a conversation with artist, designer, and educator Philemi Wilson. I think it's something that maybe then many of us don't know about subconsciously, but it's really there in ways that for many older cultures, that for Latinx folks or indigenous folks, for most folks of cultures that come from ancient older wise cultures, that ancestral presence is always there. This idea harkens back to this notion of a collective consciousness amongst a people. It is the reason why I continue to make jewelry like my grandmother, research people my father once wrote stories about, and return to textiles as a medium for storytelling, just as the women of my family continue to do. But first, I want to ask, how can a design practice that is surfacing stuff ensure that it is utilizing it responsibly? Stories shared of Black life lived to a larger audience runs the risk of being fractured into single layered portraits, or can be made monolithic. Furthermore, is it possible for a Black designer to mediate the way in which narratives of Black folks can be consumed? Which brings us to step 3, hypervisibility. Oop.
You know, one thing I would add, Brenda, that I would like to hear, when I time enough, and I leave here, I would like to hear what people say about me, amen to that, because please want to have people perceive me. I just want to change what I think about myself. but I'm just curious.
Explorations into this line of questioning began in the spring of 2022 with conversations with maker, learner, and educator Netta Bomani, in which she recognizes a certain type of pragmatism required of Black makers. We don't live in a world where Black people set conditions, so it is inherently radical to do just that. Yeah, I think it is radical. But also, I think it doesn't de-radicalize you to understand the limitations of that. This is not me trying to be pessimistic or anything. It's just a kind of pragmatism that Black object makers need to understand. There's this social construct that we will constantly erode the conditions until we make a new world that's just going to continue to happen over and over and over again. Maybe part of setting the conditions is you making the new world. Dear is a visual narrative that connects disparate letters, people, and periods to tell a story of the everyday. GRAN SANS passed down a bag of letters that she had held onto, written by my great-grandmother, Dorothy Dot Moon, to my great-grandfather, Edward Jimmy Moon, during his World War II deployment at Pearl Harbor. The bag also included other miscellaneous letters that my grandmother had received from friends and family during the 1950s and 60s. These letters require one to mind the gaps, to speculate the context in which these notes were written, and the people, places, and things that connected them. In this project, 11 letters are audio narrated by my great-grandmother's kin: Sandra Hightower, Stacy Pulley, Taylor Hightower Jr., Taylor Hightower III, Brett Pulley, Lillian Hightower, Blake Pulley, and Farron Moon Hightower. All of these letters are woven together by the means of a website, book object, and publication. The book object features a full transcription of all 11 letters, with all instances in which this text was reinterpreted by myself being placed within brackets. There's only one copy of the book that houses the physical computing objects that were utilized during a performance that show the various connection points between the letters. Additionally, there was a printed reproduction of the pages sans any sort of physical computing being available for the audience during the performance itself. All images are redacted within the book, only appearing with the use of the accompanying website. Within the browser, the viewer is directed to click along with the narrative within the printed publication, which reveals the redacted images. This condition grants limited access to a viewer who experiences the book alone and requires the viewer to commit time, effort, and labor to experience the entirety of the work and narrative itself. As mentioned, this project was offered as a live performance within the RISD Museum. The viewer is guided through the narrative with overlapping characters, places, and events amongst a 3-channel backdrop of found videos from the public domain with music composed with collaborator Cassius Pickens. The impermanence of the performance itself is intentionally setting a condition intended to foster obligation from an audience. This experience is intended to be dizzying, complex, and require a certain level of commitment, just as the process of parsing through parts of the archive can be, and in which this method of surfacing requires. A method that has culminated in a body of work, some mentioned in this presentation, much of it not, is a method that I hope to continue on layering, evolving, and amalgamate through time. And finally, this brings us to a project I began in the summer of 2020 titled Black Joy Archive. The conceptual model of archives, broadly anything that collects, holds, references to the past, has become commonplace in humanistic and artistic discussions of memory and history. This model has been used to refer to concepts ranging from the collective memories of a culture to the discrete physical objects and their historical context. A photo album becomes an archive. A neighborhood becomes an archive. The stains on a blouse. Anything that can hold and spark memory. This has no doubt been to the chagrin of professional archivists with inferiority complexes, underappreciated and undersupported by the faculty who now clutch the archives close. At the same time, it has liberated those outside of the profession to redefine who and what holds historical value. Dorothy Berry. I cannot position myself and my current work without recognizing what I see as a unique challenge posed only to Black and other POCs within these spaces. To join this gate-kept community while Black, in most cases, is both an achievement and a concession. There is a sense of pride, of getting a piece of the pie, if you will, when you cross those pearly gates and enter into the institution. But subconsciously, you become aware of your body, its perception, and what your outputs are both saying and how they are being understood. You can be intentional with your wants, your refusals, your specific vantage points, but all these actions require active labor in order for a maker who is Black to not solely be lumped into the categorization of Black, insert artist, designer, writer, or some other moniker. In my experience, when you're Black and you enter here, you are faced with the paradox of hypervisibility. Because of their minority group status and underrepresentation, people of color are tokens and as such are hypervisible within the academy. Paradoxically, token status may result in their being made to feel simultaneously invisible and hypervisible. My understanding of self in relation to the space of that my body inhabits shifted in 2020. Up until that point, I had lived a certain type of hypervisible existence. I worked as an apparel designer for a company that employed 50 plus within their New York office, but only 6 of those employees, including myself, were Black. This was nothing new up until this point, as I had learned how to navigate these spaces in a body that looks like mine, where there's only one and few. I had gotten used to the feeling of having to be excellent in order to gain recognition from what the majority that held positions of power. And I had learned the hard reality that my mistakes would result in bigger repercussions. Well, in 2022, the pandemic happened. What I, like many, thought for the fortunate enough would be a few weeks of sequestered inside of my Brooklyn apartment, instead resulted in me moving back home to my parents in Jersey for several months, and our new lived reality that we are still trying to understand to this day. Within the first few weeks of quarantine, I was laid off from my job, along with the one and only other Black woman on my team. This stirred me on various fronts, but I was most unsettled by the fact that this company decided to let go 2 of the few Black employees in this first round of cuts. We were both solid hard workers who put in the extra hours to prove our worth, took lots of things for our mistakes, and wanted more from a space that did not prioritize our growth. Then a few weeks later, Ahmaud Arbery's murder became a reoccurring image shared again and again and again from our screens, pocket computers, and news sources. Fast forward a few more weeks, and it's Breonna Taylor, murdered within her home, most of us receiving this news from within our own. And then we all watched George Floyd's killing again and again and again. Cue the flurry of unsolicited messages from people you haven't spoken to in years, the Black squares, the very long walks around your neighborhood to clear a busy mind, and the inspired organizing by those with abilities that still blow my mind to this day. And most of all, the disorienting feeling, the isolation during a season of what seemed to be the loudest cacophony of discontent experienced within my lifetime. And with that, I began to gravitate towards the stuff, finding refuge in photo albums of my family. Black Joy Archive began in May of 2020 as a digital and print project intended to serve Black people as a therapeutic practice in self-preservation and self-esteem. The initial open call for submissions was made via social media, asking Black folks to submit images of their joy, via childhood or family photos, candids, or personal artwork they have created. Over the course of 3 weeks, over 60 people submitted over 500 images, which were all digitally archived online at blackjoyarchive.com. Each contributor is listed along with all of their submitted content and their self-authored descriptions. In conjunction, there was also a limited run of hand-bound books that were produced with support from Brooklyn-based Rizzo studio, Secret Rizzo Club. An addition of 35 publications were made available for sale, with 100% of the proceeds being donated to 3 organizations working towards various Black liberation efforts. Over the course of, excuse me. But after the project's initial release in August of 2020, there had been a cultural shift, with questionable moves of allyship being presented by corporate entities, capitalistic industries, and capitalistic industries utilizing taglines such as Black Joy for commercial profit. And the overall anti-racial fervor that ignited non-BIPOC individuals that summer of 2020 becoming debatably apathetic. Quickly, the idea of Black Joy became an essentialized tagline, a term used as the inverse to the monolithic idea of Black trauma. One used to ease white guilt, to profile stories of Black life without the obligation to acknowledge nuances of that person's lived human experience. It became a product of the distillation system. Suddenly, I was encountering a new facet of my own hypervisibility, one that hoisted me in positions in which it seemed my Blackness was being utilized as a means to check a box, a way to ease guilt within systems that were now facing public shame. It was confusing. I began to worry if something that was intended for one public was instead becoming a commodity for another. In the spring of 2022, I set out to create a volume 2 of this project with another open call to Black folks asking, how can we continue to persevere, to push against the noise, the trends, and expectations in order to uplift our own narratives? And more importantly, what does your Black joy look like to you now? Black Archive Volume 2 features stories, poems, and images by 27 contributors. The book and website were designed utilizing fonts by Black type designers with the color palette specifically referencing the Negro Motorist Green Book. There are 2 versions of the book. One was made in collaboration with Secret Rizzo Club, in which all the interior pages were printed with Kelly Green ink, and the covers were letterpress by Studio DWRI, based in Providence, and then spiral bound locally within Rhode Island. This version serves a similar function as the books produced for Volume 1 in that they are a limited run and only being pressed once. The second book is printed with a print-on-demand manufacturer, which allows for more copies to be accessible on the ready. There have already been 150 copies pressed and sold to date. Contributors were asked to write a response to the 2 questions posed prior, with portraits of some folks being captured by Jaleel Marcus Portia. The website was developed in collaboration with engineer Jesse Hoyes and Francesca Bueno, featuring all submissions from both volumes 1 and 2, and similarly to volume 1, a portion of all book and merchandise sales have been donated to Sister Song Women of Color Reproductive Justice Collective. The second volume dropped in June of 2022, and contributors and community members alike were able to convene, connect, and celebrate by way of a launch event hosted by the Ace Hotel Brooklyn. Whereas Volume 1 fulfilled the type of urgency required and appropriate for the moment in which it was made, Volume 2 was an unhurried reclaiming of time, space, and energy. Through this uncomfortable confrontation of inner versus outer consciousness, I recognize that the process of surfacing cannot be separated from the current social landscape.
An artist's duty is to respect the times. I think that is true of painters, sculptors, poets, musicians. It goes on to say their choices. But I choose to reflect the times and the situations in which I find myself. Back to my beauty. And that is crucial time in our lives. When everything is so desperate, when every day is a matter of survival, I don't think you can help but be involved.
Nina Simone. These past few years have been a series of confrontations with discomfort and pride, hesitation and reclamation, confusion and joy within a practice I like to call surfacing. Like the color orange, I am hypervisible, highly visible, but also very ordinary. A full person made up of all the messy, cool, and complex stuff that makes up a life. And just as I embrace the color orange, I have decided to joyfully occupy my hypervisibility and decide how and when to use it on my own terms.
All right. I think that's it. I love you all.
I love you more, dear heart.
Thank you.